for a new episode of the Beirut Banyan, and we're joined today by Emile Hokayem, a senior fellow for Middle East Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Emile Hokayem is an analyst on regional politics and security matters in the Middle East and focuses on interstate and intrastate politics and conflict and the role of non-state actors. We get into all the above. Emile Hokayem emphasizes that local leaders need to be held to account. And while there are serious geopolitical concerns that impact Lebanon's sovereignty, that should not excuse domestic actors from serving their citizens better and properly enacting reform. Emile Hokayem offers his perspective on the uprising underway. And if you're enjoying these daily episodes, please consider a contribution through Patreon. There's a link in the details box below. An independent endeavor, I'm trying to capture the uprising day by day as events unfold. For episode 39 of the Beirut Banyan, I'm Ronnie Shatah with Emile Hokayem. This uprising, this revolution or attempted revolution, does it feel different to you?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's unique in its breadth, it's unique in its message, it's unique in the fact that it is not cross-confessional, but it's anti-sectarian. It's unique in the sense that it is actually a revolutionary movement because it questions the foundations of the system. It's unique because it's not driven by regional or geopolitical concerns. Mm-hmm. It does have regional and geopolitical implications, but it is not driven by that. It's unique because politicians have tried to, ride this wave and have so far failed. The number of, the irony of the Lebanese system is that every individual politician can pretend to be against the system or to be a reformist, even as they exist in a system that rewards them and they have no interest in changing. So in the past few days, we heard that Michel Aoun is a reformist, Nabi Hibir is a reformist, Hassan Nasrallah is a reformist, Saad Hariri is a reformist. But the danger here is that those leaders are quite adept at manipulating popular movements, perhaps not this one, but manipulating the popular movements by essentially embracing the message while emptying it of its substance. And that's a danger that looms at the horizon, although I have to say that it's unlikely in this case that they will succeed.
And would you put the momentum of this uprising on the political breakdown of Lebanon, or is it more the economic stagnation and potential collapse, or is it really a blend of both that brought this kind of momentum to the streets?
Nothing ever happens for only one reason. Mm-hmm. There's a convergence of crisis that is affecting Lebanon in a pretty violent way. Look, one of the problems that the Lebanese have had over the years, one that was reinforced by foreigners, is this celebratory talk of resilience, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. That Lebanon is resilient, the region is on fire, but Lebanon will survive, etc. All this was essentially a distraction, avoidance of the hard issues. Mm. What happened in the past, 10 years is the slow but sure erosion of governance at every level in the country. Not that the country was doing well 10 years ago. It's just that 10 years ago, there was a lot more international attention, there was a lot more goodwill, etc. And what happened, especially since 2011, is that, with the whole region on fire, Lebanon used to be always in the top 3 or top 5 issues on the Middle East. And for a brief moment, 2005, 2006, it was actually on the top of the agenda. But then suddenly, 2011 happens, and then you have Syria, Yemen, Libya, every other country in the region on fire with revolution. Larger countries with more populous countries, countries with oil, countries with that produce large migration problems, etc. And then so Lebanon, lost its ranking. It was no longer a top issue on the agenda. And so, we talked about resilience, but we had lost goodwill. We were no longer, the darlings of the Gulf states. Westerners. Jacques Chirac was no longer president in France, so the special bond no longer existed. All, and I can go on and on. But Lebanon was also, a major disappointment for a lot of countries, especially donor countries, that they poured in all this effort, all that money, and things would never get fixed, right? Yeah. Reforms wouldn't happen. So in the meantime, we got complacent. Lebanese political elites had a hard time adjusting to the fact that they no longer had the access they used to have. They could no longer count on that kind of support, right? Especially from the Gulf states and from France, etc. And so you wake up a few years later and you realize, oh my God, the country is in tatters, and we don't have this safety net anymore.
Do you put the burden on that on the local leaders being so corrupt that nothing good happened? Or is it a structural issue within Lebanon that doesn't allow a country like France, or even if it's Saudi Arabia, countries that were interested in helping financially, that they didn't see any tangible results? In other words, where is the problem here?
I think, look, I believe in agency. I believe that fundamentally, yes, there is structure, but people make choices, and that essentially lead to specific outcomes. And in Lebanon, I think that our political class is not just corrupt; it's also incompetent. Yeah. So they're not even good at being corrupt anymore, because they're essentially sinking the country that was actually producing this this wealth that they themselves diverted for their own good. And we have no excuse. I mean, you talk to other people on your podcast who are better informed than me when it comes, for instance, to our banking sector and how greedy the Lebanese would get in terms of their deposits at the bank, and they wanted the high interest rates because they were making more and they weren't taxed in Lebanon the way they would be elsewhere, etc. But we never took the time to have an honest discussion about our economic system. And it's only recently, and in a pretty spectacular way, that we started making the link, at least at a popular level, between our political system and economic governance in the country, right? And this is pretty clear from what we hear on Martyr Square, in Tripoli, in Saida, in Nabatea, and everywhere else, right? People are making direct linkages between how the country is run politically with the economic system that underpins all that. So it's good, but it also means that we're going to have very hard decisions to make soon about how we relate to foreign donors, how we structure our economy, how we think about our budget, etc. So we're in the early stages. I suspect a number of international governments are a bit nervous about all that. They got used to dealing with our political class. They tend to be quite conservative. You noted that they still poured a lot of money into the country, but they poured a lot of money in the country because they wanted to contain problems, not because they wanted to incentivize real reforms. So a few years ago, it was about containing the threat of ISIS or making sure that Lebanon wouldn't collapse because of Syria. And before, it was because of shoring up specific political parties, etc. Right?
Yeah.
It was never, as part of a real reformist vision. In large part because we Lebanese didn't articulate it and pushed for it, right? I don't want to blame outsiders for our own lack of responsibility and vision.
So the corruption is a domestic issue. There's no direct geopolitical link to the thievery, that level of crony capitalism, that this is really just a Lebanese problem in itself.
It is. At the same time, the corruption provides an opening for regional actors to essentially cater favor inside the country and so on, and it worked for a very long time. But it worked until it stopped working. Look, the point today is that Lebanon, at least for the countries that used to be financially very present in Lebanon, the Gulf states in particular, in a way is a lost cause. If you are Saudi Arabia, for instance, you look at the investment in the past few decades and you say, you put money in the central bank, you supported the Hayy dynasty politically and financially, you were around for the Lebanese, you helped with Ta'if and all this. And what do you really have to show for this investment? I mean, Lebanon's most powerful faction, Hezbollah, is directly involved next door in Yemen. It is a national security threat to you, Saudi Arabia. So, you look at it and you say, can you change the balance of power in the country? No, not really.
Right.
So perhaps actually you should cut your losses. Perhaps you should spend less money and less time on Lebanon. And I think this is what happened essentially in Lebanon. The notion that the Saudis are, for instance, as involved today as they've been a few years ago, is baloney. I mean, it's not real. A number of countries have lost interest. In some ways, it's good because it creates the space for, a political debate. I think it has direct political implications. People, including the traditional supporters of Saudi and allies and so on, now are a bit free to think, more creatively about what is important for the country.
So there is a genuine Lebanon fatigue when it comes to regional financiers, whether it's Saudi Arabia or others, that there is a deep reluctance to come and save us from sinking.
Yes, because they don't think that they can save us.
Right.
Start. Second, because they see, the past few decades as a sunk cost at this point rather than an investment. Mm-hmm. Look, they're emotionally and culturally still attached to the country.
Yes.
And that does matter. But, when you're Saudi and you're, involved in Yemen and it costs you billions and billions, and you are shoring up Egypt and you're thinking about your domestic reforms and you have a million other things on your agenda, Lebanon doesn't seem that important anymore.
Today, since we're going back and trying to, in a way, address the post-war order, and I kind of imagine this as readdressing 1989. It's not so much starting from now, that this is the moment the Civil War ended, these problems began. Are the solutions simply Lebanese coming together and finding out how to govern themselves for the first time since the war ended? Or do you see a regional and perhaps an IMF intervention or something that doesn't allow Lebanon to fully collapse, that it manages the crash landing? And I'm almost wondering where the solution is. That is this purely a domestic solution, or is there a regional solution that's in the mix?
Look, I wish I could tell you the solution was entirely Lebanese. To a large extent, it is the responsibility of the Lebanese. I mean, we have to engage in really hard and honest thinking about how we organize the country, how we organize the economy, etc. At the same time, there is an issue that doesn't have a purely Lebanese answer, and that's the issue of Hezbollah, which is front and center. We can't dance around that one. And Lebanon, in and of itself, cannot provide that answer. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to do what Lebanese politicians, including Saad Hariri or Raya al-Hassan recently have done, which is to say, this is a regional problem as a cop-out, right? I mean, it's true, but it cannot be a cop-out.
Yeah.
It's the responsibility of the Lebanese to, one, always have in mind that this is a major issue, and second, talk about it. Talk about it in terms of what are the obstacles for reforms? Whether we want whether Lebanon can build a healthy economy and a healthy society while being a militant society at the same time, right? The way Hezbollah wants it, and it's very difficult to see, the international community, regional countries, and so on, pouring money in a place where ultimately there is one faction that can use intimidation, deadly violence, etc., to shape domestic politics.
Right.
And that's a huge deal. We prefer at times to ignore this issue, but that's not how it's going to happen. Look, we also need to have a domestic, a genuine domestic debate with Hezbollah supporters to really understand, what is driving their support for the group. Is it really in a full embrace of a resistance agenda? Has it more to do with the concern of a specific community? Is it, we have to have that discussion that we haven't had for the moment, and hopefully the movement, the popular movement in Beirut and across the country can help with that discussion. We're no longer the national dialogues of previous years. You remember when they would all meet in Babda and pretend to engage in a discussion about the defense strategy, and nothing would happen.
Yeah.
Something a bit more genuine, something in which Hezbollah supporters are directly engaged. Because that conversation today has to reach within, these communities, within families. We know we're all in it together, but that's not going to be just a Lebanese solution. Ultimately, Hezbollah is linked to a much broader regional, power play by Iran, and that's going to have to be part of the discussion.
But the Babda Declaration, which you referred to in 2012, seems to be a Lebanese declaration. That there was no international input into that attempted neutral policy towards the Syrian war. And if I'm understanding you right, that Babda, we would need to have something like that, something that's domestically created with an international understanding that it should be implemented?
The Babda Declaration, to be honest, is not. I mean, it was a nice statement of intention with no import. So that's really sad. If you want something that survives, if you want to implement something, you will need to have the Iranians on board. And that means having a broader regional security discussion. This cannot be just about Lebanon. And how do you do that? How do you guarantee? This is where geopolitics have a direct impact on the trajectory of Lebanon. I'm quite pessimistic, to be honest, at this point. We'll have such a discussion. I think, the Trump administration is causing a lot of damage, and I think it's maximum strategy on Iran is not the smart or the right thing, to be honest. They certainly Iran should be pressured in some ways, but not this way. I don't think the way it's done serves the interests of Lebanon. I think the Iranians themselves are quite resilient and have an interest in holding fast and surviving this phase and trying to come back in the game. And look, the thing that's important to understand from Iran's perspective and also from Hezbollah's perspective is that they don't see what's happening in Lebanon, but also Iraq for that matter, as a popularity contest, right? They're not here to win the hearts of the majority of the population. Iran is not a country that cares for the prosperity and the well-being of the countries in which its partners operate. They want their partners to shape the trajectory and the strategic orientation of these countries, right? And so, we're victim of that at this point. We're victim of that, and I hope this makes it in some of the discussions in Beirut.
But for the moment, and this may be more tactical, that the issue of just the general issue of weapons outside of the state apparatus, that has not really come up. I mean, beyond kullun yani kullun, we don't really hear it. It's not present. It's not what's driving the protesters for the moment. And do you think that's a good thing? So in other words, if you're going to address the issue of weapons, and if you want to eventually reach a sovereign state, is it a healthy thing for the moment that it's not the pressing issue, that people are focusing on the economy, on corruption, and for, to various degrees on the sectarian governing structure? But is it, do you think that these things can be addressed without addressing the issue of weapons, or are they so linked together that there's no escape, that you have to address the weapons and make it a central issue?
No, look, I think it's understandable that it's not front and center. It's not topic of the day. This is not the only issue that should be discussed. I want to be clear about that. It's not there is mismanagement, corruption, and incompetence across the board in Lebanon, and that affects pretty much everyone all the time. So I understand that. I also, as I said, there is no immediate solution to the issue of Hezbollah's weapons. So that too, just making it the priority just risks splitting or diverting attention from the more immediate concerns.
Right.
That said, first we need to understand that Hezbollah is not a reformist party, first and foremost because its priority is to preserve its armed status and its operational autonomy. And that matters fundamentally. Hezbollah is not going to be, this reformist partner that will really and genuinely engage in many of the conversations that we need to have. For that matter, all other politicians, that applies to all other politicians in Lebanon. But the difference here is, as we saw just last week, is that Hezbollah is the only one that first can intimidate and impose its will within its own community, and second, can deploy the kind of muscle to intimidate others as well.
Yes.
So that's important to note. The second point is that, look, yes, we want international goodwill, and if somehow we manage to put together a strong policy reformist platform, etc., fine. But the international community will continue to care about the state's control over its domestic affairs.
Yeah.
So that's not going to disappear from the agenda. And third, I would say, in such a tense regional landscape today, if tomorrow, for whatever reason, you have an escalation with Israel, the issue of weapons is going to come back and be at the center of the discussion, right? Of course, there will be a moment where the Lebanese rally and of course see Israel as an enemy and so on. But you also have to understand that in the absence of a defense strategy, we cannot turn to the international community and say, hey, we're doing our part. Because we are not doing our part.
It is refreshing for me to hear a foreign policy analyst put the burden on local actors. It is a burden that is not expressed enough. That, and you said it earlier, the agency of Lebanese players. And maybe that is for the first time in the mix on the streets as well, because people are pointing the finger at local leaders. They're not, I have not seen one external country slogan in my daily crossings by Martyrs Square. I've not seen anyone referring to anything other than Lebanese players, which is a good thing. That is a stepping stone to addressing bigger issues.
Look, we need to have a sense that we, can shape the future of the country, that it is in our hands to, pressure the politicians, shame them, come up with ideas and so on.
Yeah.
But we also need to understand that you cannot, have a country that defends itself without a healthy society, without a functioning economy, without, international goodwill that, is more than just blackmail or emotional, etc. People need to care about Lebanon.
Yes.
Abroad because we have something to offer, because we're constructive, because we care about the well-being of our population, but because we also can imagine a neighborhood at peace. And hopefully some of this discussion is going to emerge in Beirut. Look, I certainly don't. I'm a foreign policy analyst, so of course I think probably more about the Hezbollah issue than your average citizen, because I see how it impacts the country's standing. I see how it limits its potential, and it's frustrating because I understand where Hezbollah is coming from on a number of issues. I do, like others, I come from northern Lebanon, so I, personally didn't see, the Israeli occupation, and I can imagine how traumatic it was. Visited the South many times. Our experience was different, right? We were more exposed to the Syrian occupation. But ultimately, we should also be able to understand the trauma of those various experiences. We should be able to respect those experiences and so on. But we should also have an honest discussion about what's best for the country.
And that sounds more like a dialogue among communities as opposed to political bargaining. That are almost
individuals. I think that there is a massive individual responsibility here as well.
Mm-hmm.
There is one thing about the protests in Lebanon and so on is that we also and how they've unfolded since the 2015 ones, but especially this current wave, is that people are going down because of individual choice.
Yes.
It's not they're not responding to community pressure.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that's a good place to leave it on a positive note, and I really appreciate your time, Emile, and your perspective on both the foreign policy matters and the burden that Lebanese leaders face, and hopefully they will begin listening. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Good luck to all of you who are in Beirut. I wish I were there.
Daily episodes continue as the Uprising enters its fourth week. To stay updated, simply subscribe through your preferred podcast platform or find us on our YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatar. This is the Beirut Banyan.